Daily news and analysis. We keep you informed and inspired.
This is World Today.
Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi calls for cooperation as Munich warns of a fracturing world. And we'll take a look at how GGI, Global Governance Initiative, shapes cooperation and redefines international engagement. Welcome to World Today, a news program with a different perspective. I'm Ge Anna in Beijing. To listen to this episode again or to catch up on previous episodes, you can download our podcast by searching World Today. Our top story, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi is calling on countries to set aside their differences and pursue win-win cooperation, urging dialogue instead of confrontation. He made the remarks when addressing the annual Munich Security Conference over the weekend. On the sidelines, Wang held 9 bilateral meetings, including talks with the United States, as well as a trilateral meeting with France and Germany. This year's conference comes amid growing tensions in transatlantic relations. Its annual security report, titled On the Brink, warns that the world has entered an era of what it calls destructive politics, with the post-war international order facing growing strain. So for more on this, joining us on the line are Einar Tangen, Senior Fellow at the Center for International Governance Innovation, a Canadian think tank. Thanks for joining us, Einar.
My pleasure, and a good day and a happy new year.
Dr. Yao Shujie, Changkong Professor of Economics at Chongqing University. Great to have you, Professor.
Happy New Year.
Happy Chinese New Year to you all and to our audience around the world. Gentlemen, let's start with this year's Munich Security Report. It argues that the U.S.-led post-war international order is being dismantled, and it blames today's U.S. government for that. So how do you assess this conclusion, and do you see this as a real crisis, or is Europe overreacting? Professor Yao, would you like to start?
Yeah, I think it's a very legitimate claim by the European side, because over the last, after the Second World War, the U.S. played a very important role of restoring the world economy, especially the economy in the European countries and other parts of the world. And national security around the world have been highly stable until very recently, I think in the new 21st century. The United States changed the direction, changed the emphasis, become the so-called mega, the American Great again. Mm-hmm. Actually, the intention is to make the United States the only dominant power in the world and ignoring the interests of the allies, especially agitating the close ally in Europe. After the British exit from the European Union and also coalition of 27 countries, highly fragmented policy, it doesn't mean that the European Union is able to, have a big balance, not only in the military aspect, but also the economy and international trade perspective. So the European Union have been quickly weakening after the financial crisis in 2008. The United States economy is booming, the stock market is booming, but in Europe, you can't see any similar trend of economy movement. So the comparative size of the European Union in terms of the GDP, in terms of the volume of trade, and also the military capability has been relatively weakening compared to the United States. On the other hand, you have China, India, the BRICS countries which have performed relatively, have a better say in the international arena. So the former geopolitical military order dictated by the G7 has become a fundamentally change. The U.S. become bigger and bigger, and the rest of the G7 is getting smaller and smaller. In particular, after the Ukraine crisis, there's a fairly clear confliction between the United States and the NATO and Europe. So the leadership in the European Union, such as Germany, France, and the British, they feel they have been supporting a fairly strong United States, but United States have been fairly selfish in terms of getting more and more self-interest in every aspect. So the European Union, they said the old order is the old order that the rich country, the powerful country control the world, rather than the order for everyone. Now, even this very narrow defined order by the European state is not going to be fully protected by the United States, because it will getting further and further that the European country will be more and more marginalized in everything. So they started to be aware that things have to be changed so that not everything have to be primarily depending on the United States control. And this is the fundamental issue. Probably I can see in a security conference this time, the contradiction within the traditional NATO, within the traditional G7, within the traditional Western allies have been changed quite fundamentally.
Insightful. Einar, how do you interpret the sense of anxiety emerging in Europe based on this report? And what structural or political drivers are fueling that concern?
Well, I disagree a little bit with my esteemed colleague. I do not think the United States economy is strong. If you start looking at a number of commercial bankruptcies, delinquencies, personal bankruptcies, fragility of over 50% of the people who are one disaster away from potentially spiraling into homelessness, this does not speak of a strong country. 10% of the population is now supporting over 50% of the buying. In fact, they're over the majority of the consumption. So the United States, as we can see quite clearly, is in crisis internally. We can see this in the what's happening in Minneapolis. The ICE group basically gone to war with the American public. Meanwhile, you have the Epstein files, which are casting doubt on the political elite on both sides of the aisle, Democrat and Republican. What is Europe reacting to? The U.S.-led architecture was already, under tremendous strain. The U.S. is dismantling it. In Schulz's German chancellor's speech, he talked about rupture, which is echoing Canada's Carney's statement earlier on at this year, 2.5 weeks ago. What does it reflect? Well, the U.S. is using trade as a weapon. They're using sanctions, which are way overreach. This whole thing about Greenland and taking it, colonizing Europe, the irony there being quite apparent. Europe had colonized many other countries, but it didn't really react to the idea of another country colonizing it. NATO's geographical expansion has had mixed results, resulting primarily in this conflict in Ukraine. So they're very, very weak. You start looking at the economic basis of this. They're at, in 2024, growth was at 1%. And that was for the EU. Many nations were actually in recession. Very few people talk about that. And then in this last year, 2025, it wasn't much better. Somewhere expected to be between 1.3 and 1.4%. But next year, even being worse. So there are many weaknesses in Europe. And their primary concern of the elites, for some reason, is Ukraine, not the internal problems of their people. So you're seeing a growing shift between them. So the reaction to the U.S. is basically, are you with us? But you have this kind of half-pregnant moment. I say half-pregnant because you cannot be half-pregnant. You can either be pregnant or not pregnant. But, the Europeans are trying to play it in between. Earlier on, when Rubio last year talked about the unipolar moment being over, I think a lot of people in EU interpret this as, okay, the U.S. is accepting that there is a multipolarity and that middle countries are going to play a bigger role in the world. What they were not expecting was the U.S. to say, well, all that means is that we're just going to act like the law of the jungle. We'll act in our own interest, and we will disregard the interests of anybody else. And that, in essence, this is what we're going to take over this region. We're going to take Greenland. This is what this is all about. We're going to take that Western Hemisphere. We'll continue to have an active presence in areas where we believe we have a strategic interest, like Asia, but we don't really care anymore too much about the Middle East other than Israel. And of course, Ukraine and Europe are coming in a very distant third or fourth. So it's a seismic shift of power. They're trying to figure out how to do it. On one hand, they say, he said, you cannot do it alone. You have to do it with us. I don't even know what that means. I mean, he's basically saying, please include us. That is not a very forceful way of doing it. I do agree with my colleague that Europe is confronting this need to be more independent, but is stymied by its lack of organization, too many member states going in many, many different directions. So at this point, it's a mess. I think from China's perspective, they see a lot of divides in the US. They see kind of inability to act, although you hear a lot of words coming out of the EU. And going forward, it's in China's interest just to be a steady pole, to be exactly what they are, promoting peace, promoting trade, not trying to get involved in the internal politics of these entities and letting them play out and seeing where the chips land.
Mm-hmm. Building on that, Professor Yao, about transatlantic relations, at the conference, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said the U.S. and Europe should join forces to rebuild Western dominance. He insisted damaging transatlantic ties isn't Americans' intention. He even said Americans are sons of Europe. So, compared with J.D. Vance's sharp criticism of Europe last year, this sounds much softer, right? So do you think this can really bridge the gap between the U.S. and Europe?
I think it will be fairly difficult because the conflict has been already created. It's very difficult for the U.S. and the European allies to rebuild the relationship to the former conditions. My colleague is probably right because even within the United States, there's a lot of division between the have and the don't have, the rich and the poor. Now we see the situation. The United States have everything available. The European Union have been highly fragmented, so it's weakening over time. Why it is weakening? Because the G7 states, they used to be cooperative, and nowadays the United States just want to have to maximize the interests of the United States itself and ignoring the interests of the close allies. By ignoring the close allies, using the trade tariff, and also by threatening the European security, as my colleagues mentioned about Greenland, and also the different idea in NATO, and also Ukraine crisis with Russia, and also even try to annotating Mexico and Canada. These have lots of uncertainty and also anxiety among the European members. Whatever tone, the tone by Vance is very strong, is very direct. This time by Rubio is probably a little bit softened, sound of Europe. But the Liberian sound could be even worse than the normal close friendship. So how you interpret the sons and the fathers, a very unlistening son could be very damaging to the very traditional father. So I don't think the town is going to solve the problem. How to solve the problem? You have to change the direction, change the fundamental vision of the United States for common prosperity, common security, rather than for the interests of the United States itself.
Mm-hmm. Then against this complex transatlantic dynamic, let's now shift gear to China. On the first day of the conference, the Chinese delegation maintained a very intensive schedule. Foreign Minister Wang Yi held 9 bilateral meetings, including sessions with the United States and a trilateral meeting with France and Germany. Einar, what signals do you think China was sending? And how would you rate its overall diplomatic performance during the conference?
This is a feud between Europe and the United States, and they're trying to find if there is any common ground and what that would be. And China's role was just to be exactly who it is, as I was saying before. He mentioned, he doesn't want bloc confrontation. They oppose Cold War mentality, support multipolarity. But the main thing is that China presents itself as a predictable partner, big contrast to what is going on in the United States. He sees itself as pragmatic, not ideological. And it is there to show as a contrast to what Rubio is saying. I mean, if you look at what Rubio said, this is really something. He was talking about recolonizing the world, making it more white and more dominant. This is a throwback not only to the laws of the jungle, but going back 150 years, really strange. Hopefully that resonates with some of the Europeans as they realize that they made a mistake in the first place with this excessive colonialization, taking and basically robbing other countries. And they'll realize that there has to be a new way forward. And this was really, the message here. Wang Yi was not trying to be strident. He was just making it very clear that China has a different idea about the future and how countries can work together, especially under multipolarity.
Mm-hmm. Professor Yao, what's your take on China's overall diplomatic performance and the signals it's sending internationally?
Yeah, China is trying to play the so-called stabling role in the international politics and the military relationship. China is emerging as a major economy and military power. It have an internal logic. Like we are strong, but we're not going to conquer other territory, going to suppressing another sovereignty or sovereign world, a sovereign country in another part of the world. And if anything happened to China, China is able to defend itself, including the Taiwan integration into the mainland. And if the United States or any other country is violating this Chinese red line, the basic principle of integration, then China will be able to do the business by itself. Now, as the relationship between China and other parts of the world, especially with the United States and Europe, China play a fairly neutral position in this way. We are welcome with any friendly relationship with the United States, any friendly relationship with the European Union. But on the other hand, if the United States continue to be as aggressive as before, or even more aggressive than before, then certainly I think the European countries, they feel they are under threat. They used to be very close brothers and friends. Now they feel they are under threat. So once they feel they are under threat, they have to see for a third-party cooperation. And China sees this opportunity. It's time to open the door to welcome European states to work with China so that they will be a third pillar of the international security structure, the United States, Europe, and China. Now, if Europe want to work closely with China, is more welcome than ever before. So Wang Yi probably signal a very clear idea. China is open-minded. China is strong enough to counter any aggression, including any potential aggression from the United States. And China is strong enough to work with any third party so that by working with China, they will provide a very strong and stability third pillar in the international peace order. And this is what probably my understanding of Minister Wang Yi's speech at the conference.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of that, Einar, Wang Yi met Rubio for about an hour and made it clear again that Taiwan is a red line for China. He warned that continued U.S. arms sales or so-called security cooperation with Taiwan would damage the hard-won trust between the two nations. So how do you rate this repeated emphasis from Beijing to Washington?
I mean, this has been repeated for as long as I've been around, this idea that Taiwan is not a new issue. The U.S. violated it, the terms of its own agreement. It said in the Taiwan Relations Act that they would only supply defensive weapons to Taiwan and only those things necessary to keep in repair and maintenance of the existing armaments. There was nothing about escalating. So those days have passed. You've had the U.S. try to create this idea of ambiguity that somehow defense of Taiwan is up in the air, although the United States embraces the one China policy. So because of the upheaval in the international order, the concern from China is that there's no miscalculation by the U.S., that somehow Trump thinks that this is perhaps the ultimate way of shifting focus away from the Epstein files and his domestic issues, is to start some sort of proxy war or to heighten tensions in the South China Seas or in Taiwan. So China is trying to make it clear at this meeting as well as at every other meeting, do not cross this red line. And the difficulty is you have people like Rubio who are basically neophytes in this area, that he's not qualified to be in the position he's in, yet he is, out there pushing these things. And the reason I say that is here he was instrumental in having a state of emergency declared against Cuba, as if Cuba is a threat to the United States. It's been under sanctions since Castro took it over. It is impoverished. It does not have any kind of offensive capability. It is not helping anyone spy on anything that you couldn't possibly get from satellites and things like this. And in that, he deliberately named Russia and China as malign actors. Now, this was not even done during the Cold War. All right. Even at the height of the Cold War, the countries were not specifically named in these kind of communiques. So I really question his temperament, ability, and understanding of international issues when they're doing it. Now, this may well be just the next opportunity after Iran to push people's attention away from the domestic issues and the Epstein cases. But this is the kind of danger that China has to warn against. Have to make sure that this does not, because it is a red line for China, and forcing China to act will help nobody.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for the clarity and analysis. Professor Yao, let's shift to China-Europe relations. Foreign Minister Wang Yi also held a trilateral meeting with his German and French counterparts. Many observers described it as rare and highly symbolic. What's your take? What significance do you attach to this meeting?
I actually figure out a few points about the significance of this meeting. It is the first time foreign minister meet the counterpart from Germany and France. Number one, Germany and France are the biggest economy, almost the economic engines of the European Union nowadays, given that Britain is already outside the European Union. So first of all, China pays significant attention to the European Union. I think Europe is becoming a potential workable friend or partnership with China. This is the first point that I take from the meeting. Secondly, I think from the French and the German perspective, the French and Germany, they are willing to meet with Wang Yi. At the same time, it means the same thing. Germany and France, they are willing to work together as a team representing the European Union, that they would seek for a potential collaboration with China, as I just mentioned earlier. Because the European Union has been critically marginalized, and there's no hope that they can play the same role as before in the pre-21st century order. So that the European Union need to have some cooperation with another power. Although this power is a peaceful power, China, not so aggressive as the United States. But this is precisely what the European Union wishes to have, because China is not aggressive, China is strong, but by working with a very unaggressive and strong economic bloc and a military power, I think the European Union would be able to find another stability pillar in their geopolitical military consideration. So this is the second point. I think the third point, I would think, is that it sends a very clear signal to the United States. In particular, that Germany and France as a team representing Western Europe in particular, it is going to work with China, so that they wish that the United States be more friendly than before, more considerate than before, as they play the role with the European Union, especially within the NATO and the Western allies.
Then, gentlemen, one last question. Based on our discussion so far, looking toward 2026, what's your take on the future of China-US and China-EU relations? Einar, shall we start with you?
I don't have a lot of hope for the China-U.S. relations, because it'll be driven by internal domestic politics within the United States. Right now, Trump's base is splintering away from him. They were not interested in a vigorous foreign policy, even if it's, quote, to help America. They don't understand it when they're hurting at home. I think that is a big question mark. There is, Obviously, Washington is aware that China has quite a few of cards, very important ones, that the U.S. has to pay attention to. In terms of EU and China, it's still this big question mark. I think they're still feeling it's about Ukraine. And on the other hand, you have a situation where they need to have some sort of trade. They need to have an out if they're going to balance the relationship with the U.S. I don't agree that the Germany and France meeting with China was productive. It was productive for China, but it signaled that they do not represent the EU. They're the most powerful nations, but there was an outcry from Spain, and Italy was unhappy. So you're just creating more divisions by doing that. So I think it's going to be mostly transactional in nature. There'll be some reticence. They'll try to say they want to set guardrails and things like that. I believe that's nonsense. This is not the colonial world where you tell people how they have to deal with you. Each side should meet clearly with their concerns and try to be pragmatic about how to solve them. I think China is prepared to do that. We'll have to see if Europe is.
Professor Yao, looking toward 2026, where do you see China, U.S., and China-Europe relations heading?
Yeah, I think the United States will still be as aggressive as before during the Trump administration. Unless after the Trump administration, things will be changed. The European Union is the most difficult economy and military political bloc at the moment because they don't have a very clear direction. China have to maintain internal stability and very calm relationship with the United States and Europe to make sure that China still have a peaceful environment for further economic development and the prosperity of the Chinese people.
Thanks, gentlemen, for those insightful analysis. Einar Tangen, Senior Fellow at the Center for International Governance Innovation, a Canadian think tank. Dr. Yao Shujie, Changkong Professor of Economics at Chongqing University. This is Road Today. We'll be back after a short break. You've been listening to Road Today with Mika Anna. As the Chinese Spring Festival begins, we bring you a special edition. For the first episode, we explore how the Global Governance Initiative, or GGI, is being implemented and the responses it has generated. China has a new vision for global governance, one that emphasizes equality, shared responsibility, and the voices of developing countries.
We should adhere to sovereign equality. We should maintain that all countries, regardless of size, strength, and wealth, are equal participants, decision makers, and beneficiaries in global governance. We should promote greater democracy in international relations and increase the representation and voice of developing countries. We should advocate the people-centered approach. We should reform and improve the global governance system to ensure that the people of every nation are the actors in and beneficiaries of global governance, so as to better tackle the common challenges for mankind, better narrow the north-south gap, and better safeguard the common interests of all countries.
President Xi Jinping's Global Governance Initiative has drawn immediate attention from nations around the world.
To warmly and support the Global Governance Initiative presented by the President of the People's Republic of China, our good friend Xi Jinping. We really believe that if we want to build a community of a shared future, we need an initiative like this.
A lot of problems we have now, it is difficult to do it alone, but in rethinking the global governance through global governance initiative proposed by the President Xi Jinping, I am really confident that we could really change the world, create a new era, and live in new international order.
The initiative has been praised as timely, coming at a moment of multiple global crises and waning confidence in multilateralism.
China solved a very difficult equation, the equation that balancing domestic modernization with the global responsibility. The point actually of the high standard opening up means that China has the good intention to deal with the world with the best they can do. I want to say that China is not rising alone. China is rising with the intention of lifting others. The success of China is an opportunity for many.
For decades, we lived in a largely unipolar world. But now we stand firmly in a multipolar global system where power, ideas, and influence are widely distributed. Global governance today must also confront a rapidly changing technological landscape. Artificial intelligence, biotechnology, quantum computing, and digital governance are transforming our world at a breathtaking speed. These advances offer unprecedented opportunities, but also profound risks. This is why global governance must now extend to data ethics and the moral implications of technology. In other words, we must place moral and ethical questions at the heart of global decision-making.
Equality, responsibility, and a vision. How will the Global Governance Initiative shape cooperation and redefine international engagement? For more on this, let's have Dr. Li Pei Mei, Assistant Professor of Political Science at the International Islamic University, Malaysia, Dr. Zhou Mi, Senior Research Fellow at the Institute of World Economy at the Chinese Academy of International Trade and Economic Cooperation. Professor Li, when President Xi first proposed the Global Governance Initiative, he said global governance should treat all countries as equal players, decision makers, and beneficiaries. From your perspective, what's the biggest thing that's not working in today's global governance system, and what kind of a solution is the GGI really offering?
Well, I think in today's global governance system, many actually viewed it as being very unfair and unequal. So I think this is one of the main reasons why countries, especially developing countries, they kind of dislike the current global governance system, because the current system only allows the privileged one to make important political, economic, and social decisions. But that decisions itself are going to affect the whole world. So in it, the way how decision is being made is very clearly very unequal and unfair. So other countries, what are their rules? They can only take the role of bystanders. So without the ability to truly contribute to the decision-making process. Therefore, very often we see that the decisions being made are often disproportionately favoring one side, which is the decision maker. So for Global Governance Initiative, it's very different because it's promoting multilateralism, it's promoting, creating space for developing countries to also voice out their concerns and also their demands. So you can say that the Global Governance Initiative actually offers countries the opportunities to participate equally as participants as well as decision makers. So in that, by having such space and opportunities for developing countries to participate equally, you can expect that the outcome of the decisions that will be made would be taking consideration of all parties and does not only benefit one or some countries.
Dr. Zhou Mi, what do you make of this? How does this new vision speak directly to the problems we see in the current global order? What kind of world does the GGI ultimately seek to promote?
Well, I agree with Professor Li's opinions on, some kind of unfair practices or mechanisms based on certain group of countries. But I want to emphasize that there are even some worse situation. That is, some countries or more than 160 members have joined WTO. They have made some commitments. And, nowadays we're seeing some countries want to violate their commitments. They were not just trying to fulfill their commitments. So the governance issue is not only about some new areas, it's also about some traditional ways of doing businesses. Like the globalizations are based on, so many kind of respect from different sides, no matter whether it's strong or weak. But if we're able to reach this agreement that we will follow the several principles like the most favored nations, the national treatment, and also the transparency, these three important principles of WTO, we have to fulfill our commitments, like keep the tariffs lower and also trying to make some trade facilitation for the different stakeholders. But if we are going to violate our commitments, I don't think that we have the base for discussion of the new areas. In other words, I would say that we are between the two very important issues. The first one is how can we continue with our traditional relations or commitments made to the WTO, to the multilateral system. And another one is how can we deal with the new issues like the digital trade, like something to do with the green trade, or whether there will be more protectionism. So we have to deal with both sides to trying to have a better governance. And the governance is benefiting all of us, not just a part of us.
Mm-hmm. Then, Dr. Zhou, from the early reactions we've seen, what are developing countries hoping to get from the GGI?
You can find that in the recent 2 years, we are seeing the Global South countries are really working very hard to try to have a better platform. These platforms are really important for them to continue with their efforts of being involved in the global trade. Well, many of the developing countries are really want to have a better space for development based on the trade, on the fair trade with other countries, with low tariffs and more access of the market. So based on that, kind of expectation, they really want to have some governance that are taking their demands as one of the priorities. They need some platform that they can speak for themselves. So for many countries, like, the agriculture products as one example is one of many developing countries' priorities. They want to reduce the different treatment, in the platform, like in WTO, many developing countries argue that most of the developed countries have put so much money to subsidize the farmers to make it more, cheaper, compete with the other developing countries. So they want them to reduce the subsidies, but they do not. I mean, the developed countries, they do not want to do that. So in this regard, they want some platform to keep the subsidies in our sustainable way, not just trying to distort the order for the global trade in the agricultural products. So I would say that developing countries are really want to have more trust from each other and also to reach some kind of commitments, and they want to fulfill them. They need some enforcement mechanisms and also some mechanism to deal with the disputes. And they believe that these are really important for them to speak for themselves, not just to listen to the others while they change their attitudes from year to year.
Mm-hmm. Professor Li, how Malaysia viewing about the initiative? Do you think this support from Global South, for example, is driven more by frustration with the Western-led order or by specific ideas in the GGI, like sovereign equality or closing the North-South gap that feel more realistic and reliable?
I think both. First, I think developing countries have long viewed that the current order does not give them enough space to voice out their concerns and voices. And as for Malaysia, actually, in the past decade, I think we have always pushed for multilateralism. So we are basically against unilateralism, which is basically what the current global order is about. So, but at the same time, when you look at global governance initiative, basically it's promoting that, it's promoting multilateralism, it's promoting non-interference, respect for sovereignty. So for Malaysia itself, we think these are something very important because as a small state, we are not happy or not inclined for major powers to actually intervene in our domestic affairs. And actually that's happening. So for example, currently there might be geopolitical competition between countries, and then one party, one side might try to, force Malaysia to take sides. So this is something that Malaysia, does not want that to happen. So GGI basically is promoting the core values that aligns with Malaysian national goals, like respecting sovereignty, non-interference, and they also talks about giving more, space in the international relations for countries to participate, and many more. And another thing I would like to add on is that for developing countries, and especially for those countries that in the past they have been invaded by the West, they mainly would support GGI. So for example, like, Afghanistan and then Iraq, countries like this, because they already face the consequences of being intervened by the West. So these are the countries that I think would, strongly support GGI because it resonates with what they want.
Mm-hmm. Professor, many politicians openly say the world has moved from a unipolar system to a multipolar one. Do you see this shift making global governance harder, or does it actually create a real opportunity for the more democratic international relations that the GGI talks about?
Okay, I think there is consensus that the world is no longer a unipolar world. Jeffrey Sachs, an American economist and public policy analyst, also shared the same assessment. Yeah. So, but as we know, when a system is going through the transition, there will be some instability, there will be some adjustment, and there will be some heightened uncertainty, which we are witnessing today. So like what I mentioned earlier, we're probably seeing some intensified geopolitical competitions. The reason is because the hegemon, the sole power, is actually trying to keep its predominant place. So it would try its best to use various means to stop the world from turning to a multipolar system. So during this time, we have witnessed, like what just now Professor Jomi said, tariff. So some countries, the hegemon itself, are using tariff to prevent that transition. And then we're also witnessing that hegemon using economic sanctions on other countries, or even threat of war to stop that transition. But to be honest, I think the decline of the hegemon is very evident. Hence, I believe we're moving towards a more democratic international relations. And as China is promoting global governance initiative that emphasizes on basically equality, equal participations, and multilateralism, I think we could really move towards a more democratic international relations because GGI is also supported and embraced by other countries.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Jomi, do you think a more multipolar world makes global governance harder, or does it open the door to a more democratic international relations?
Well, I would say that, when we're now in such a world based on the multilateral systems, like for WTO, it's not that easy. Mm-hmm. So I still remember some people, they talked with me, they said that when we have reached such kind of, WTO-based system, it has costed us, millions or dozens of millions of people's lives. So we have a very difficult time to reach that kind of status. I don't want to say that we want to, abandon nowadays mechanism to try to find some new one. But I would say that there are so many things that we need to do more reform, like for the reform of WTO, like the reform to introduce more people's voting rights in IMF and World Bank. So I think that is naturally very important because the world is changing. The world is changing to not just one country take a part of maybe occupy a half of the GDP globally. There are so many new powers or new countries are emerging. They have more demands. The trade patterns, investment patterns, companies' distributions are all different from the past. So we are just about to enter a new era of the digital trade or artificial intelligence era. There are so many new things. If we are able to provide some of the advices or opinions from different sides, I think seems to be more reasonable. And the governance is a kind of a very high level of order. So based on the different opinions, maybe we can try to find some mutual understanding, some common consensus on certain areas. We can start from that. The GGI is a kind of initiative, as for the Belt and Road Initiative, it's not just decided by China. We just propose that. Mm-hmm. So based on this kind of mechanism, we want to to propose that maybe all of the related and the interested groups can join this initiative to discuss about their requirement. They can just tell others about what they really want. And I think that is a kind of important mechanism for all of us to try to find a more balanced way of doing businesses. The GGI is a kind of a very new initiative. It's a reflection of Chinese philosophy that we want to have the different opinions from different sides. We can discuss about what are the most important and reasonable ways of governing. And I think that is more sustainable compared with just one country to decide everything. So I would say that maybe have more advantages, and we have to respect this new platform. We are also encouraged to join this kind of discussion.
Dr. Zhou Mi, China often says that high-level opening up is a key way to advance the GGI. Based on what we've seen in 2025, like freer trade zones, regional trade deals, and opening up services, how's China using its own openness to push improvements in global economic governance?
Well, I think that China, at the beginning of the century, China is a latecomer to the multilateral system. So we accept all the set rules, like I mentioned in WTO. After almost more than 2 decades, we have changed a lot internally in the domestic laws and regulations to fit for the requirement of the multilateral system. But now we are entering a new phase. I think that the world is facing too many uncertainties, and the trade regime, in the trade regime, we're not seeing some new rules or governance developed together with the economy itself. In the free trade zone, as you mentioned, we are trying to encourage the different areas to trying to explore which is the best practices to do with trade, global trade or the regional trade and the investment. In the different areas, we want to do some kind of practices to try to do some experiment. Based on this experiment, we will be able to deliver some better idea about the governance. Like in the Hainan Free Trade Port, for example, we trying to explore the new ways of doing the cross-border trading services in the negative list based. So, it is actually our unilaterally opening up. We are doing that by ourselves. So based on the practices in Hainan, we just modified our foreign trade law, and we have introduced this new mechanism in the law itself. So, it is kind of a very good practices and good example to show that China is willing to just trying to change our ways of managing the trade and investment based on the real economic status. And we also want to share our experiences with our trading partners. Like, we just concluded the negotiation with ASEAN about the free trade agreement 3.0 to introducing more digital trade and also the green trade. I think that kind of practices can also to give more ideas to our partners on how can we provide the enterprises with better environment. I mean, that is kind of just examples. We want to do more to introduce, to do some experiments first, and then introduce some of our experiences and also to share our lessons with our trading partners. I think based on these kind of practices, we can have a better understanding about what should be the right thing and how can we proceed with the new things which is good for the businesses.
As we look at this initiative that was just introduced in 2025, even though the GGI has gained a lot of support, there is pushback from unilateralism and power politics, and some countries are still watching to see how things play out. Professor Li, what do you see as the biggest obstacles right now, and how can the GGI move from ideas to real actions?
Yes, I think one of the main challenge would be the narrative. The West is trying to shape the narrative that GGI is a way for China to basically dominate the world. So they are actually trying to warn other countries from getting too involved with China. So this might be one of the challenge of its implementation. So what I would say is that they really need to be counter-narrative to that idea. So one of the way to promote counter-narrative is for China to organize some dialogues about GGI, just like what Dr. Zhou Mi said just now. Basically, GGI still very new, is taking shape. So China is just proposing the ideas, outlining the ideas how GGI core values are, which are, to be honest, quite universal, because I think all the countries, developing countries, they love to have their sovereignty being respected. They want to be treated equally. They want to be to be able to participate in decision making at a global level. So it would be useful that they have dialogues with countries to think about how this new governance model should be. So I think this can better translate GGI principles into more concrete outcomes.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Zhou Mi, what's your take? What do you think are the main challenges at the moment? And how can the GGI turn its vision into tangible results in the coming years?
Yeah, I think that's the most important thing is for us to trying to start, not just, to start to act, not just to talk. Mm-hmm. So actually, ZGI is not just a kind of a very virtual concept. It has a real implication about the practices, about the laws, regulations on the trade and the investment. Can we do more to trying to, to strengthen our commitments in the multilateral system and fulfill any kind of the disputes coming from the disputes mechanism from WTO? I would say that we need to respect that, because we are now seeing some countries or economies are trying to, change their commitments to WTO. I don't think that is a good way. So first we have to overcome, or trying to take back to fight against some protectionism pressure. And second, I think that is very natural for us to deal with the new issues, because the digital trades are increasing so quickly. We need to give some of our practices on that mechanism. And these are really our challenges we have to deal with. So maybe we can start from certain, smaller interested groups, and we can expand this mechanism to a wider range. And I believe that the good examples can really have more attractive, more economies will join this kind of games and play very promising and sustainable way of, making the businesses a bit more friendly and easy to be done.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Zhou Mi, to elaborate more on this, looking toward 2026, what directions do you see the GGI taking, and in which fields could we expect progress?
I think that in the year of 2026, it's a very important year for China, because it's the first year of China's 15th five-year plans. Mm-hmm. So we are going to have a better and higher quality of development. So based on that, we are also seeing that other countries, they have their events. I think that for the GGI, we need to, make this kind of ideas to be more accepted by more countries. And we also want to welcome the ideas and opinions from other countries. I don't think it's already there. The GDI is just have a very earlier stage of development. So we want to inject more elements, inject more wisdom from different partners. And I think that based on the real effects, we can foresee that the companies and enterprises will benefit from that.
Professor Li, looking ahead to 2026, where do you think the GGI will focus next, and which areas might see real breakthroughs?
Well, I think climate governance is one of the way where GGI can actually focus on it, because the U.S. is basically withdrawing from it. So the U.S. has really declared that it's not participating in the Paris Agreement. And in fact, they are the largest polluter, yet they are withdrawing from it. So what it means is that other countries need to step in. It's not only China, but China could play the leading role in driving, climate governance. But other countries should also work hand in hand with China to discuss and come up with a more concrete plan to fight climate change. Because as we know, countries like those maritime countries, they are the one most affected by climate change. And a lot of developing countries, they are facing more serious threats of climate change because they do not have the money, they do not have the fund to fight it. So I think it's GGI may offer some ideas on how countries can actually better fight climate change together. So besides that, I think what we can do is you can try to link GGI with explicitly to UN reform proposals. As we say, GGI and UN existing mechanism and institutions are not exclusive. In fact, GGI values and principles can actually drive current mechanism. So it will be useful to try to link GGI with UN reform proposals, with IMF reform proposals, and with other reform proposals.
That were Li Pei Mei, Assistant Professor of Political Science at the International Islamic University, Malaysia. Dr. Zhou Mi, Senior Research Fellow at the Institute of World Economy, Chinese Academy of International Trade and Economic Cooperation. That's all the time for this edition of World Today. I'm your host, Ge Anna. Thank you so much for being with us. From all of us here at World Today, Happy Chinese New Year.